topic for today is, does the universe have a purpose? No, it's not really. Actually, that was the question asked of a reasonably famous popular scientist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, by the Templeton Foundation. And he answered it, and the answer's gone online in a MinutePhysics video entitled, Does the Universe Have a Purpose? And I'll put the link in with the information accompanying this video. But I wanted to respond to this little video and what Professor Tyson said. Okay, does the universe have a purpose? Well, the first thing to note about that is that it's a stupid question. Why? Well, it's a stupid question because it assumes that the universe has a purpose, singular, one purpose. Now, there's no reason why the universe couldn't have a number of different purposes. If it has a purpose at all, it could have multiple purposes. And asking it that way actually prejudices the answer somewhat. And some of the things that Tyson says later in the video, in his video, are dependent upon positing one purpose and then knocking it down. Now, I don't blame him. I mean, it wasn't his fault. He was asked a question and he answered it. But it was a silly question because it actually prejudices the answer. Does the universe have a purpose? Well, maybe it has a number of purposes. Here are some purposes that one could easily posit for the universe. To bring forth beauty. Indeed, to just bring forth things that exist, maybe being itself, is a purpose. Being, beauty, life, sentience, reason. All of these could be partial purposes for the existence of the universe. Just the fact that it is and is beautiful could be enough to justify its existence in terms of purpose. Alright, I'll come back to the purposes later. At the beginning of his video, he makes a bit of a category error, I think. He talks about the fact that religions and religious people often use modes of thinking and modes of investigation that are non-empirical, and that, these have failed because they've failed to predict or explain how the universe works. Now, he's doing this in the context of finding an answer to the question, is there a purpose to the universe? And he says, well, I don't know. But nobody else can possibly know either, because if they claim to know, they must have done it non-empirically, and therefore their answers must be false, because non-empirical methods can't give us an explanation of how the universe works. And that's really a non sequitur and a category error all in one. It doesn't follow, because what he's saying is, okay, non-empirical methods do not explain how the universe works, therefore, however religious people get their answer to the purpose of the universe must be wrong, because we know non-empirical methods don't tell us how the universe works. The problem is, how the universe works is not the same as why the universe exists. The why and the how are distinct, rationally distinct questions. So it's a category error to say, oh, what you're doing can't tell you how the universe works, therefore you can't have any explanation that's rational on why the universe is what it is, or why it exists. Now, it may well be the case. You can say that you can have an argument about whether or not you can have a method for determining the purpose of the universe. But just saying that non-empirical methods don't give us intelligent answers to how the universe works will not prove that these other methods, these non-scientific methods, can't give us insight into why the universe is. Alright, it doesn't follow. It's treating two quite distinct questions as if they're one question. Alright, so that's the first problem. The purpose that is intended, the purpose for the universe intended, is not the same as a mechanical process. Why is not how. And indeed, one why, one purpose, could have many ways of achieving that purpose. Many hows, many processes could get you to the same endpoint, and vice versa. There might indeed be many processes which in themselves could have many different purposes. A person could put into reality a particular process, could make something happen, and the process occurs, but then somebody else could use the same process for a totally different purpose. Okay, so that's important to realise, that why and how are very distinct. All right. The other problem with what Tyson said was that it was historically very oversimplified. Basically what he was saying was, these religions have had no success in understanding how the universe actually works, how it's put together, therefore they can't have any insight into the purpose of the universe. Now, apart from the fact that that doesn't logically follow, it's actually factually incorrect. The success we've had in understanding the universe due to modern science is a success founded in the Christian worldview. Now, this is not well known, but it's a very important piece of history. Most non-polemical histories of science now acknowledge the importance of the Christian worldview and Christendom in general in producing what we now know as modern science. But why? Is it just an accident of history, or was there something about the Christian worldview that actually encouraged the development of modern science? Well, there are two important things to realise about the Christian worldview. One is that it says that at the foundation of reality we don't have chaos. Now, there are a number of ancient worldviews and mythologies where chaos was at the foundation. Christianity says no. At the foundation there is an orderliness. Okay? That fundamentally there is this order, and that's part one. But part two of the Christian worldview that's relevant to this particular historical development is this. In ancient Greek thought, in particular, some very intelligent people contributed to that. A lot of it was based on a priori thinking. In other words, sitting down, nutting things out and saying, well, reason tells me this is the way things have to be. And the universe must behave a certain way because that's the only rational way of things working. That is just what reason would tell you must happen. So there's a necessity to the way the world works in this worldview. And it's based on rationality, it's based on mathematics and so on, but it's a necessary form or process that underlies the way the universe works. Because it was believed that if you were smart enough and intelligent enough, you'd be able to work out how things worked. Because they had to work a certain way to be rational, to be logically coherent. Now, contrary to that was the Christian worldview, which said, yeah, the universe is orderly, but God was completely free in his creation of the universe. God has complete freedom, and he did not have to create the universe the way it was. There are an infinite number of possibilities to creation, and God chose one. So on the Christian worldview, you cannot just by sitting down and really being clever and using reason work out how the universe works. You'll never do that. It's not enough. And the reason it's not enough is that God was free and there are an infinite number of possibilities that he could have chosen from. Okay, so once you accept that, then here's the two corollaries that lead to modern science. One is the universe is orderly, and therefore you can trust it in a sense. You can look at the universe, investigate it, do experiments on it, and certain predictable things will happen in an orderly way, and that order will be consistent. It'll follow a law-like structure. The very concept of the laws of physics and the laws underlying all the sciences is a very biblical concept. It's the Psalms in the scriptures that talk about the way creation works as following the laws, laws laid down by God. It uses law language to describe the way the universe works. So this idea of the trustworthiness and the orderliness of the universe is fundamental to modern science, because we expect the universe to be following a certain mathematical consistent structure. And that expectation has borne great fruit because it's been fulfilled when we do the experiments, when we do the investigations. But the other aspect of Christian thought that led to modern science was this belief that you couldn't work it all out just by reasoning, and that meant the only way you're going to find out how the universe works is to try things. So experiment and observation. If the universe could be one of an infinite number of possible forms or structures, then to find out which one it is, you're actually going to have to do some experiments. Now, unfortunately, there was some delay in this, because the fact is that for a while there, the Western Church in particular was quite enamoured of Aristotle and the Greek philosophers. And so the Greek worldview that was more into rationalism, and this is the way the universe must be, was quite dominant. And so there was a delay for a time before the biblical worldview, ironically enough, could have enough impact so that people stopped thinking they could work it all out almost from scratch, just by sitting down and nutting it out, and realised that they would have to actually do some experiments. That you couldn't presume without doing those experiments. All right. So, historically, it's not true to say that Christianity has been kind of opponent of science. There was a Galileo episode, but that was actually an exception rather than the rule. The fact is that the Christian worldview was a great nursemaid to science, because it said, yes, the universe is orderly, we should expect it to be so, not chaotic as many other worldviews posited, but also it's an order which you would have to investigate to determine. You can't just presume you know it because you're very clever and can reason very well. All right, other things to note. There's actually in the video, the Tyson video, there's an image at one point of the sacred book. Doesn't say whether it's the Bible or not, I think it just says sacred on the front. And that brings another point in. Is it true that belief in the scriptures held back science? Well, certainly overly literal translations sometimes did, but in fact it's worth remembering that people were interpreting Genesis and other parts of the Old Testament non-literally from the very earliest times in the church. This non-literalistic interpretation was not the only one. Some people interpreted literally, others didn't. The church didn't condemn either. It allowed both. And this is long before science, modern science, came up with its challenges. There are all sorts of reasons why the early Christians believed, some of the most intelligent ones too, Origen and Augustine and so on, that there were quite non-literal aspects to especially the early chapters of Genesis. So there was always understood to be room for understanding the scriptures in a way that didn't interpret them in a wooden fashion. And the reasons they believed that were not just because of their understanding of science, so they didn't have the access to the science we've got now, but because of indications in the book itself. All right. Now, another thing that Tyson says in his video is that, a purpose of the universe couldn't possibly have been, at least, it's very unlikely it was, life, or, sentient life, or us, rational life, humans, because so much destruction has occurred on Earth. Yes, the Earth is a cradle for life, but also many times there's been mass extinctions and most of life has gone extinct, and most life that's existed has gone extinct. 99.999 whatever percent has been and gone. So if life was the purpose, then it seems the universe is working against that. That's his argument. All right. And he talks about, well, that's the evidence, and, you've got to look at the evidence, and if that's the evidence, then that's evidence against purpose. Number of problems with that. Taking some pretty big steps there. The first problem is that it's selective use of evidence. So there's actually almost a degree of dishonesty, because the man's expertise is in physics. So he knows, as well as any physicist who's, informed on cosmology, that the anthropic principle is one of those areas of great debate in physics. And the reason it's a debate is because, as a matter of undeniable fact, the laws of physics in our universe seem fine-tuned in such a way to allow complex structures, including life, to come about. That is to say, very tiny changes in the parameters and in the laws underlying the universe would make not only all life impossible, but anything remotely interesting impossible. There are lots and lots of things that just seem fine-tuned. They must hold very small, they must fall within a very small range for life to be possible. Tiny changes in any of these many parameters would lead to life being either impossible or highly improbable. So the fact that the laws of physics allow for the existence of life, and indeed in some ways seem fine-tuned for it, is part of the evidence. It's not the only bit of evidence. Those mass extinctions are relevant too. But there is no doubt that many physicists are surprised by how well the universe seems put together at the basic level to allow complex structures, including life, to exist. It's very small changes in the laws would lead to a very, very boring universe. Not only with no life, but perhaps with no stars or galaxies, or no particles larger than a photon. There are all sorts of possibilities which the laws of physics have avoided. Now that there are various explanations for that. Multiple universes. This is one of an infinite number of universes, or whatever. That kind of explanation doesn't help at the level of the laws. It does help at the level of what they call the parameters, or the numbers, the coefficients that go into those laws. The coefficients are finely tuned, but you could get away with that by saying, oh, that's just dumb luck, because eventually if you have enough universes and you randomise the coefficients, eventually you'll get one that works for life, hence us. That doesn't explain why the laws themselves allow that possibility, because there's an infinite number of possible laws of physics, and most of them would not give you, if you just randomly put a mathematical equation down, it's not going to give you the sort of complexity you need to produce the sort of universe we've got, a universe that has life in it. So there's a selective use of evidence. He hasn't looked at all the evidence, and that's a little bit dishonest. But there are other problems too. Okay, all right. So the Earth has had a history of many mass extinctions, and all sorts of things have happened to make life difficult. But we know, as a matter of inescapable fact, that despite the negative aspects of that process of evolution, if you like, the catastrophes and the mass extinctions, the results show that here we are, look what we've got. It worked. And it continues to work. Now, death is a part of life. I mean, mass extinction is just a larger example of death. But death is a natural part of biological life. So looking at death and saying, well, the universe is not friendly to life because death happens, sometimes lots of death, doesn't really make sense. I mean, death is a natural part of biological life. Yes, you get mass extinctions, and you get smaller extinctions, and Life just keeps bouncing back. It seems to be part of the system, part of the structure. So you have to look at the whole picture and the big picture. And I think when you do that, you realise that in fact there is some reason to think that life is one part of the purpose behind the universe. Okay, now people might say, well, all these catastrophes and all these mass extinctions, God wouldn't do it that way. And I'll come back to that when I discuss on another video the problem of evil, or the problem of natural evil in particular. But first, let's just look at the evidence as a whole and accept the fact that it's very, in terms of interpreting what we see around us and what's happened in the past, well, what we see around us now is the result of what happened in the past. So all these extinctions and so on don't prove that the universe doesn't have life as one of its purposes behind it. Now, the other thing he says is, look, if humans were the purpose, if we were so special, then why did it take so long? And why did it take all this complex development to get to us? And I think that's a silly question, because you could interpret the fact that we're right at the end of that process in any number of different ways. The science itself, the facts themselves, do not impel an interpretation. It's almost based on your aesthetic sense as to how you interpret it. So you can either look at it and say, oh, look, obviously mankind's just turned up at the end of this random set of processes and we don't have any significance. We're just lucky, we're here. Or you could look at it and say, well, look at all the stuff that led to us, and yet here we are. We're at the end of that process. It took a lot of things to happen to make us possible, but here we are. And a lot of those things, if they hadn't happened in the past, we might not be here. So you can take it either way. That the facts themselves don't force an interpretation of purpose or lack of purpose. They can be taken either way. Now, the other thing is, this analysis is looking at purpose and saying, it's a very inefficient. I think that's one of the words that he uses, inefficient. Now, these kinds of efficiency-based analyses, or utilitarian-based analyses, looking at, the resources that go into something compared to what you get out of it, they're irrelevant. If you're talking about the purpose in terms of if there was a creator God and he decided to do something, God is infinite. So therefore, efficiency is irrelevant. Efficiency is based on a comparison between your inputs and your outputs. Now, efficiency makes perfect sense in, say, economic analysis when you're looking at the fact that you have limited resources, and with those limited resources you're trying to get a certain outcome. In economics you're trying to satisfy people's needs or wants. But efficiency is irrelevant when you don't have limited resources. When you have an infinite resource. It doesn't make any sense. The other thing is, if God is what Christians say is, and he's timeless, he's eternal. And so whether it takes 2 seconds, 2 microseconds, or 20 billion years for something to happen makes no difference to God. And therefore it couldn't make any difference to his purposes, because 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years, as the good book says, to God. So the whole, it took too long for us to be the purpose, or all this other stuff happened that was inefficient, doesn't make any sense when talking about God. God can do what he likes, and the other thing is, he doesn't have to have us as the sole purpose, as I said at the beginning. There's a kind of childishness to this picture of God, that he has to work like we would work. And that if he did things, he would just do them. He would do them directly. He wouldn't use secondary causes. He wouldn't use this complex process. He would just do things instantaneously. But if God is an artist and not just an engineer, then maybe he would do things a different way. If he's a storyteller, then maybe this complex and incredibly intriguing process is actually a good thing. It fulfills his purpose. Because it's interesting. The ironic thing is, many of the people who say this kind of thing think that evolution is incredibly interesting and elegant and wonderful, and cosmic evolution is fascinating and beautiful. and they praise it to the skies. Well, yeah, exactly. So if God's got a choice between just snapping his fingers and bringing things into existence, complete, or actually having this amazing process leading to stuff happening, this story, if you like, why is it automatically the case that he must choose the instantaneous route? I mean, it seems we're putting up a straw god, a god who's actually boring. Why would he, if he wanted to, use a progressive process? Alright, here's the other problem. Tyson's answering, I think in his own mind, a claim that humans are the sole or the main purpose of the universe. Now, the scriptures don't actually say that the only purpose of the universe, the whole universe, is us. They talk about the creation being good in the very first chapter of the Bible, before humans came on the scene. So, before life came on the scene. I mean, God seems to create things for the sake of their very being, their very beauty, quite apart from whether they're alive or not, quite apart from whether they're sentient, conscious or not, quite apart from whether they're us. It is not the case that humans are the sole purpose of the universe. That's not the scriptural teaching. It's not the biblical teaching. Insofar as it's not the church's teaching. Insofar as the church has a teaching, it's that the purpose of the universe is found in the glorification of God, which happens in many ways, through creation. We're just one of those ways. And then later on he talks again on this assumption that we're the only purpose, if on a theistic premise, which is false. Talks about human hubris. You know, why should our understanding of purpose be any more important than the bacteria that inhabit our gut? They might say, well, humans exist to provide a home for us. That was his argument. All right. It was a bit silly, really. Look, if we're talking about empirical methods of understanding the universe, then empirically you're never going to be able to ask bacteria or any other creature other than humans what their purpose is or what the purpose of something else is, because they don't have any concept of purpose. They don't have any concept of a concept. Humans are really unique. It doesn't take hubris or arrogance to see that. Human beings are unique. So we are part of the purpose, and a special part of the purpose of God's purpose for this universe. We're not the sole purpose, and nobody ever claimed we were on the theistic premise. But we are special, and it's pretty obvious we're special. The very fact that Tyson is making a video like this and talking about this, and those bacteria are not doing that, is one of those indications that there's something special about human beings. And it's something that we can, empirically observe and verify. So I think most of these arguments against purpose fail, sometimes because they're category errors, they're confusing process, or how with why, and also because they rely on a rather immature view of God, God's methods, and God's purposes. The assumption that human beings are the only purpose for creation. The assumption that whatever purpose God has, he would have to do it with maximum efficiency and minimum effort, as if effort means anything to God, who's omnipotent. So when we dismiss the straw God and the concepts surrounding that straw God, most of what he talks about in the video really makes no difference. It's almost irrelevant to the question of whether or not there's purpose. We can't answer that question based on how the universe works. Not directly. How the universe works can give us certain hints, maybe some strong hints, in its orderliness, in its beauty. But that's as far as it goes. Not everything can be discovered by a scientific experiment. And the evidence for God's existence is not based on a scientific experiment or a number of scientific experiments, but it does exist. Is it empirical? Well, in some ways it is. But all of that is grist for another mill. We'll talk about that on another video. But I just wanted to answer some of the points that Tyson made, because I think it's important to realise that a lot of his reasoning was flawed. Sometimes inherently flawed, and sometimes because it was based on a false understanding of who Christians claim God to be, how we understand Scripture and science, and a false understanding of what divine purpose is really all about and how it could and would be achieved. Alright. As I say, nothing in the video really dealt with the actual claims of theists and Christians, or was in any way a body blow to our worldview. But that's enough for now.